Hello. This is a pilot for podcast that we're recording for Wayne Korean Intercultural Center and Gary Bouchard on the Humanities side. My name's Israel Small.
My name is Duke Addy.
And I'm Professor Alexandra Locking from the History Department.
Okay, and today we're going to be talking over a couple of topics, but mainly we're going to be centering on how we intend to keep BIPOC students and other marginalized students at Saint Anselm College and able to keep them engaged in class, feeling comfortable, and also how humanities have developed at the college and where we think they're going to go in the foreseeable future. So the first main question I would like to ask, what difficulties arise in teaching history from cultures that can be problematic?
That's a really interesting and great question. I've been thinking about this since you sent me the questions yesterday, and in a lot of cases, it's more an issue of whatever pre-existing knowledge or lack of pre-existing knowledge students come to the classroom with, because in a lot of cases when dealing with non-white European societies and cultures, there are a lot of things we don't know automatically from our own culture, and especially in popular media as a medieval historian, I see students coming to class with a lot of misconceptions about other cultures. So I think some of it is actually almost about undoing those pre-existing misconceptions and kind of addressing them head on.
Yeah.
One really prominent example when I teach ancient Greece is the movie 300. A really prominent example.
Zack Snyder did a number on humanity with that movie.
Yes, he did. It is an interesting movie. But that one you kind of have to address directly. What is he doing to popular conceptions of people from the East with the Persians and the immortals and the monstrous forms they have and everything.
If I remember correctly, weren't the Spartans generally hated during the time period?
Yes, they were.
And then he made them the heroes of the story. We
Yes.
love historical revisionism.
Yes. There was about a 20-year span where Sparta was the most popular city-state from ancient Greece because no one actually knew what Sparta did. But I think we're moving away from that now that more and more scholars have been pointing out that Sparta was a massive slave-owning society and they were a stagnant society because they never wanted to change or adapt. And they were incredibly xenophobic. So addressing stuff like that is actually is how I try to start courses, where I kind of expect students to come in with ideas from popular culture especially. And especially because I am a medieval historian, I'm teaching medieval classes. All of my classes are going to have to deal with religious conflicts between medieval Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And especially here in the U.S. in post 9/11 period, those are pretty loaded issues.
Very much so.
So again, it's just sort of a matter of kind of highlighting those at the beginning of a class and saying, we've got to work through these. And a lot of it is about getting into the theological beliefs and motivations in the historical period for each religious group and kind of explaining those to sort of understand where each group is coming from.
Okay, thank you. You take number 2.
All right. For our next question, we had, what steps, if any, have you seen be made or made yourself to make learning more inclusive and accessible to marginalized students or at any other institutions as well?
Sure. So this is actually a really topical question because I don't know if this has been announced to undergrads, but the faculty as a whole have been part of a DEI review process for the last couple of years. I am not on any committees that have been dealing with that information directly, so I don't know exactly what campus-wide initiatives are being considered right now, but I know there is a widespread concern to make courses more inclusive, especially in fields that have tended to marginalize BIPOC students historically. So for example, Conversatio has had a lot of content change over the last few years.
Yes.
To include more authors of color, to include more female authors. And I was able to start a new medieval studies reading group with Professor Georgia Henley in English using a pool of money that's available to faculty called the Diversity and Inclusion Innovation Fund. and we're reading a medieval romance that actually deals with issues of gender identity in 13th century France, where a girl is born to a noble family and her family dresses her up as a boy so she can inherit, and she spends her whole life as a man, basically. And then she has to convert back to being a woman at the end of the romance.
This sounds roughly like the reverse of something I've read about in Guilty Gear. Am I right, Duke?
Yes, indeed, you are.
Okay.
So I think there is a sort of campus-wide push right now. I know I developed a new course for this term on migration and race in the pre-modern Mediterranean to kind of highlight those, to make myself highlight those issues, and to bring in more students of color. It turned out to be really popular with the nursing school, interestingly enough.
Interesting.
Which actually, in a way, makes sense because Manchester is a refugee resettlement city. And I think a lot of our nursing students in their clinicals are encountering peoples from different cultures.
I can say for sure because I teach in Access Academy. The school district, even though it's a sample size from the school district, the student body is fairly diverse, especially when compared to the state at large.
Yeah, absolutely. I helped with the National High School Ethics Bowl, the regional competition that was hosted on campus a couple weekends ago, and the Manchester Central High School was a very diverse team. And I will say, in terms of outside of St. Anselm, what I have noticed is that institutions across the country are really emphasizing hiring faculty who are coming from underrepresented groups. And I think the hope is that if you hire faculty, BIPOC faculty, then they will help students feel more comfortable in the classroom as well.
I can only imagine that in a state that I'm pretty sure ranks in the bottom 10 in diversity, that it would be hard to pull from a pool of people. So it makes me worried how long these things would take, but as long as steps are being made actively to do so, change will come.
It will, and the history department actually has experienced a little bit of this. We tried to hire a postdoctoral faculty member for 2 years, a couple of years ago, and we went through a college consortium program that was specifically geared to helping to place recent graduate school graduates, recent PhDs who are BIPOC. In postdoc programs. And they were very highly in demand, and St. Anselm at the time, we couldn't really compete with the offers that the applicants were getting from other schools. But that the history department was able to go to the administration and say, this was our experience moving forward with faculty hires, so you've got to keep this in mind, and you have to adjust offers moving forward.
Competitiveness is a growing problem because I know a lot of speakers used to, from what I've heard from people who used to be students here, like Karina Hernandez, not Corina Bonilla, sorry, that there were a lot of speakers that would come here very frequently, and now there's fewer speakers and it seems to be fewer events, in part because inflation seems to just keep getting worse. But also people are starting to run out of money in budgets. So it makes it considerably harder.
Yes, and I think this is going to be true at every university right now. The pandemic wreaked havoc on college budgets across the board. And it's going to take a few years, I think, for colleges to kind of recover from that. And there's also there is an upcoming sort of demographic cliff for fewer college students to be going to college in the next few years. So a lot of colleges like St. Anselm are actually reviewing their overall financial structure and making changes. But I know St. Anselm is prioritizing DEI initiatives as one of their financial necessities. So
I mean, if the amount of emails sent out, then it's a pretty hard battle between DEI, Campman, and student affairs. Send out 1,000,001 emails. But I do want to know, what made you choose to become a history professor? Because it's not necessarily the most glamorous profession, but it is definitely needed as someone who's a history and secondary a double major.
I fell in love with history, the field, when I was a freshman in college. And I just I lucked out. I went into college thinking I was going to be an English major. And then I had this one professor at my undergrad institution in Virginia who was phenomenal, and he converted me completely to ancient and medieval history. And so I think for me it was the combination of he introduced me to the fields I loved, and he was an excellent professor, and I've always wanted to be like him. And I really love the research aspect of it. I like being able to explore new ideas and new sources, and being a professor is one of the few jobs that pays you to do that directly, and at least in terms of researching what you find interesting. A lot of other jobs do have research elements, but
it's a bit more dry.
Right, or it would not be like if the FBI has been hiring history PhDs, for example. I don't know if I would find the research for the FBI into contemporary American problems as interesting as I do my medieval weird stuff.
That's fair.
Yes.
As someone who produces, who likes to try to produce music in his spare time, I feel like it's a very similar thing between people say digging in the crates for old records, digging through the records to find new things that you can apply and analyze. So I feel like there's a bit of overlap in things that we both find interesting. Besides the fact that I also have liked history since I was a child, which is mainly because my grandfather made me read a lot of books.
That's a good start.
Well, for our next question, we were wondering what aspects of the history of the humanities do you personally find interesting?
Ooh, all of them. Actually, that's one of the reasons I became a historian specifically, and I moved away from English. I like to think of history as the universal humanities field, because with history we are dealing with the history of humankind, and that means we can do anything we want to in a lot of ways. And so with history we get to play around in other humanities ballparks a lot. So with my own research, I'm an historian, but I do a lot with narrative sources, with historical chronicles written in the ancient world or the Middle Ages, but I can also use fictional works from the Middle Ages, songs, romances, things like that, as examples of medieval culture. So I like it all, and so I became an historian.
Very fair. I like to think of history being as one big story, and as reference, because I'm taking a high Middle Ages class. There were characters all the time, no matter where, no matter how, where or when you find them. Abelard is a very interesting figure. I did not know that Charlemagne got so propped up by so many people. I knew that he was important, but I did not know that he was that important.
Yes, from his crowning as emperor in Christmas Day 800 all the way up through today, they're still talking about Charlemagne. There's a rapper, isn't there? Charlemagne the God? Yeah. Charlemagne
the God is a rather divisive figure, at least for me personally. He's always trying to get on somebody's nerves. At least that's my opinion of him. Is he funny? Yes, but very inflammatory.
So he's the modern day Abelard.
In his own way, yes. In his own way.
So he's really honing in on that medieval stuff.
Okay. And the last question that we have, how can Saint Anselm College and other liberal arts colleges make the humanities a more attractive discipline? What has worked and what hasn't?
This is, again, another really topical question, because there's been a lot of news stories in the last 20 years about how humanities are on a decline nationwide. I think a lot of it is that college is increasingly being seen as a direct route to specific careers. And so, and a lot of the potential majors do lend themselves more easily to one specific career than others, right?
Business majors, yeah.
Business, nursing, We have a new public health major, things like that. And I think with that mentality, a lot of the humanities like history, English, philosophy, art, the immediate jump people make between humanities and careers is just teaching. You're a secondary ed double major, right?
Yeah.
Which is a great job opportunity and incredibly important, but it's not necessarily the only one available to you.
My secret dream is to be on some of those CNN documentaries. I can't lie.
Yes. Actually, one of my undergrad advisors was on a documentary.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So I think what the humanities need to do in terms of recruiting more students is just to emphasize, if you're a humanities major, that's a really flexible degree in terms of what you can do afterwards. And the other thing I would really argue for with humanities is ultimately at the core of any humanities field, you're learning how to practice empathy for people who are completely different from you. In history, we are learning to empathize with people in the ancient world, in the medieval world, in 1970s America, anywhere. In English, you're learning to empathize with completely fictional people, which is a special leap to make. And that skill is really important to have both in college and after college, and especially it would be an amazing skill to have in a lot of different careers. I've been noticing a lot of articles recently about doctors and nurses saying they wish incoming doctors and nurses had taken more humanities classes so that they could learn how to empathize with their patients. So, in addition to the really core skills of learning how to communicate and to read and to present arguments, I think just that basic skill of being a human being, just learning to imagine being someone who's not yourself.
Yeah. Allow me to preach to the choir as we begin to wrap up. But history is one of the humanities, and I feel like, as you said, it's one of the more important humanities because you have to look at everything, sort of. If you're going to take a holistic approach to the past, you allow yourself to take a holistic view of the present and hopefully the future. So my hope is that we do have a little bit of a cultural shift, more so towards allowing people to focus more on how to have a holistic view of things instead of honing ourselves and hyper focusing on how to get money.
Yes.
Thank you for listening. This is Israel Small
Duke Addy.
Professor Ali Locking.
And we are now signing off. Thank you for listening and goodbye.